Welcome everyone. This is our 83rd webinar of the M&A Club since April 2020. We're happy to have everyone with us. We welcome our guests and new members, which are still coming on every week. We have new members, which is wonderful. We have lots of interesting webinars still to come in June. For now, I'm happy to introduce Melanie Russell from Kalex Valuations, who's our co-president in Toronto. Melanie covers all of Canada with her valuation work. Ian Palm is also co-president. He's the man who started the Toronto M&A Club in 2015. Ian's a senior partner with Gowlings. Thanks for being on here, Ian. And Heather Witten is our co-president of York Region with Alma. And Heather's managing partner of Wilson and Company, a major law firm in Markham. And Alma, thanks to Alma, we have Jim with us this morning, and thanks, Jim, for doing this. Alma is also, as I said, co-president with Heather in York Region M&A Club, and Alma is the head of Bench Capital, which is an advisory firm, and Alma's a busy lady.
So good morning, and thank you to all our participants of today's M&A Club webinar, and thank you to our guest speaker for taking the time out of his busy schedule. It's truly an honor to introduce Jim Estill as our guest speaker this morning. He's an accomplished individual in more ways than one, quite humble at that. Jim is a Canadian technology entrepreneur, executive, and philanthropist who has been serving as president and CEO of a home appliance manufacturer, Danby Products Ltd. It's a private company that has locations in Canada, US, China, and also has supply chain relationships with several manufacturers in US, Canada, and Mexico, and other countries. During the course of Jim's career, he has invested in 150 startups, including BlackBerry. He served on the BlackBerry board since before they went public for 13 years. Jim received international attention in 2015 for offering to sponsor the resettling of 50 Syrian refugee families in Canada. In recognition of his philanthropic efforts, Jim received the Order of Ontario in June 2017 and was named to the Order of Canada in July 2017. He also received an Everyday Heroes Award from the Global Hope Coalition in 2017. Jim will be speaking about building a business to sell versus grow, an entrepreneur's dilemma. It's a timely topic engendered by two somewhat diverging business philosophies, and it's important to us as professionals serving Canadian entrepreneurs. I couldn't think of anyone who can genuinely speak on the topic as this truly relates to his personal experiences. Please welcome Jim Estill.
Thanks, Alma. So it's a lot different doing these things by Zoom because you can't see the audience and nobody claps or laughs at your jokes. But so I know the format here. I'm supposed to talk and then we have questions and whatnot. Yes. I am not going to talk for very long. So what I want is for people to come up and think of the questions. And I think the best way for you to come up with the questions is to for me to share a little bit more of my background so you understand where my background is around M&A. So I grew my first business, which I started from the trunk of my car, to $2 billion in sales. So 0 to 2 billion. And on that, during that time, I acquired about 20 companies. Of the 20 companies I acquired, only 2 of them were, I'm going to call it reasonably sizable in the $100 million in sales area. And almost all of those were distressed sales. Companies which were going bankrupt. I often bought them out of a CCAA or a BIA process. So in a weird way, I have a specialty in buying distressed companies and maximizing value. And I really believe that operating companies are way better at maximizing value and buying distressed companies than trying to sell it to a financial operator to turn it around. An example of that, I actually had a formula for buying these smaller distributors who were going bankrupt. So I bought Citus Systems, Trigger Technologies, Atom Peripherals, Impact, Trillium, Volker Craig, and they were mostly bought on a formula where I would pay for the receivables as I collected them. I would pay for the inventory as I sold it. I would pay a royalty on customers as I continued to sell to the customers. So that was one formulaic buy that I did. As Alma said, I did invest in 150 startups, and one of those companies was BlackBerry, and I sat on their board since before they were public for the first 13 years. So I left that company in about 2010, and over that 13-year period, BlackBerry acquired about 30 companies. So you don't think of BlackBerry as being very acquisitive, but they did buy companies. The biggest one would be QNX, which would have been a couple $100 million and whatnot. So I've been on the buy side there. And then as an entrepreneur, I've also started many businesses, and I've sold a number of those. My first company I started built to a couple billion in sales. I went public. So I was public for 10 years before selling it to another public company and then remaining with that public company for a little while. So I sold my company, stayed on with the public company that bought it, which is Synnex, for 5 years, and then I retired. And then I moved to New York for 5 years because I always wanted to do a stint in the States. My parents were aging, and so I wanted to, it was going to be either Silicon Valley or New York. So I moved to New York for 5 years. And during that time, I did a little bit of angel investing. I was on boards and doing a bit of advisory, but I was basically retired. And I learned that I actually don't like being retired. So what I did was, then unfortunately, my father got sick. And so I came back to Canada to Guelph, which is where he lived, where I lived. And I sat on the board of Danby Appliances. The CEO of Danby Appliances resigned, and I said, oh, I can go in and run Danby for a while. So I started running it, and I said, this is what I want to do. I want to be an operator. I want to run a company. So I would, said that's what I'm going to do for the next decade. The ownership group said they wanted me to sell Danby. And unfortunately for all of your advisors out there, I said, how much for? And they told me, and I said, great, I'll take it. So we did that without advisors, except of course you had to have lawyers because there's legal paperwork. So that's how I ended up owning Danby Appliances. And I bought it about 5 years ago after running it for about a year. So that's really my history on building a company to grow as opposed to building a company to sell. Ironically, it's much the same. The only difference is time frame. And the problem, if you build a business to sell and you know someone's building a business to sell, they often don't do some of the longer term things that they should do. For example, the easiest way for me to maximize the value if I were selling Danby is I simply won't do any maintenance on the buildings. Why would I bother to do any maintenance? We won't spend anything on anything. And you wouldn't even start new product lines. You wouldn't plant new seeds, because the new products that we sell, you're planting seeds that often don't yield results for 3 or 4 or 5 years. And so the problem with building a business to sell is often you end up with this short-term thinking, which is a problem actually with public companies. And one of the things I like about being a private company is we can make a decision that's a decade decision, and we can be very patient. And the poor public companies have to make their numbers every quarter. And I know that because I ran a public company for 10 years, and I'm not encumbered by that. So while I was running my first company, I thought the reason I was successful, I started the first company from the trunk of my car. I was an engineer, and I wanted to design circuit boards. I got a better deal if I bought 2 computers. So I needed a computer to design circuit boards. So I bought 2 computers, and I sold one, and then someone wanted a printer, and then someone wanted some software, then someone wanted memory or disk drive. So pretty soon I was buying and selling computer hardware, software, and peripherals. So that is was the start of my company. Now, at the time, I was still designing circuit boards. At one point, I ended up not having enough space. So I had probably 10 or 15 engineers and 20 people in the distribution side. And I was in a 3,000 square foot building, and we were just overcrowded. So I said, we need to split off the engineering part of the business. So we split that off into another company. We called it Connect Tech. And that company was in business for over 30 years and independent. We only sold it in the last year to a company called Heiko. So it was profitable for 30 years. I loved my partners in that business, which were the engineers I had worked with, partly because they just kept sending me money and they were very good, honorable, humble people and just really good engineers. I'm an engineer, but I'm not a good engineer. I'm more of a business person, marketer. And so I'm always grateful when I fly on a plane. I look out on the wings and say, isn't it great there's real engineers to design these things? Because I may have an iron ring, but it's not like the real designing. So that was one company, Connectech, 30 years before it sold. And the reason we sold that was my partner, my main partner in that, he's basically aging out. And that is where companies, often private companies, do need to sell. Like myself, I like to think I will never age out, but the fact is I will age out. I'm not trying to build Danby to flip it, but I know sometime in the next decade, I'm going to have to deal with it because I'm going to get old just like everybody else gets old. So I thought in my first decade in business that the reason I was successful was because I was in the technology business and the technology business was hot. And I'm a little bit of an environmentalist. So I thought the next decade is going to be environment. I kept running my distribution business, but I started another company within my company called Simply Clean. And Simply Clean made environment-friendly detergent products, which you can buy still in Loblaws and health food stores and stuff like that. Simply Clean was actually a failed company. So I was losing money on it. So I did what I call a rescue exit, and I sold that. I traded it to a company called PureSource for 10% of their company. PureSource was a health food distributor. They could make that business profitable because they already had trucks going to the stores. They already had people going to the trade shows. They already had relationships with customers where when us going in selling single products, we didn't have competitive advantage. So we nurtured PureSource for a few more years. It had already been in business for 15 years when they bought Simply Clean. And then that company got bought by Now Foods. And Now Foods is $500 million manufacturer of supplements, echinacea and vitamin D and all of that kind of stuff. So that was a rescue exit that at first didn't look like it would work out, but in the end it worked out. And I'm still the chairman on Now Foods board. So it's been an interesting evolution that's happened. I thought I'd share a couple of other exits which I've done. I invested in a company in Waterloo called PostRank, really, really good operator, Carol Lehman, who ran that company. And she sold the company to Google, which was awesome. But Google actually had no interest in us, the shareholders, making a return. They had an interest in retaining their employees. So their package, it was not hundreds of millions, it was tens of millions, but almost a third of that ended up getting paid to employees for retention bonuses, and only 2/3 of it went to the shareholders. So that was sort of a lesson for me when you're selling companies to Google, and that was a very interesting negotiation. Another company I had invested in and sat on the board of was Slipstream, and Slipstream made data compression software. And at the time, people were using dial-up modems, so that's what Slipstream was. It was this data compression stuff. Of course, it was going away because everyone was going into fiber and broadband, and they didn't need that data compression as much as they needed it before. I sat on the board of BlackBerry at the time, so Slipstream sold to BlackBerry, and as a board member on both companies, very complex transaction. Because BlackBerry at the time was public, you have to recuse yourself on the BlackBerry side, recuse yourself on the Slipstream side, and make sure there's all these walls so you don't know anything about what's going on. So that was another interesting experience I had. Another one was a company called Border Networks, and Border Networks sold firewalls. Border sold to Secure Computing, and a very successful exit, over 100 million. And I had funded the company and sat on the board, and it was a tough negotiation. It was sold to Secure Computer. Secure Computing was on a huge spike valuation wise, and of course we sold for mostly shares. And so I had this nice many millions of dollars of shares, which were tied up. They were in escrow. You're not allowed to sell them. And of course, when it came out of escrow, the share value had dropped by 90% because it was the .com bubble had burst. So that was a harsh learning for me on how to monetize paper that is tied up paper. And I know now that how to do that more than I did at that point. The other plug I'll put in is I invested in a company called Inex. Was on the board there for a while, and that one sold to InfoSpace. It was a good exit, not an awesome. It was in tens of millions exit. And the entrepreneur there, Alex Barati, he retired, and he moved south somewhere for 5 years, and he decided he wanted to get back into it. And then he came back and started Touch Bistro. And so I reinvested because I believed in the entrepreneur. And sure enough, Touch Bistro just did a massive raising a couple $100 million. So that was another fun one. The other comment I'll make is you get known for your successes and failures are forgotten, and you don't get them counted as black marks. So I can proudly say, I did all of these companies. Everyone says, oh, gee, Jim's a genius. Well, Jim's a genius. I invest in 150 companies. 125 of those, you don't even know the company names because they went bankrupt, and I lost all of my money on 125 of them, or just over 100 of them. Some of the other ones, I did have minor minor rescue exits. I hate to think I'm a specialist in rescue exits, but it seems to be one of the things. And it's actually a rescue exit is very good for the entrepreneur, even if you sell for a very little amount of money, because it looks better on the resume, and it also tends to stop the burn rate faster. Otherwise, all the money goes into shutting down a company, and it's not fun. I know I'm supposed to be talking on building a company to grow and not exit. Really, the only comment is it's the difference between long-term and short-term. And when you're involved in an acquisition, depending on which side you're on, I would look carefully to see whether or not the business was groomed to sell or not groomed to sell. I also liked buying businesses with warts, businesses that had problems. I remember I went into one business that had no warts. And you go in and you read their financial statements. Oh, this is great. You've got your list of employees. It's a small company, 30 people. I don't see your receptionist on there. Where's your receptionist? Oh, no, that's just my mom. She comes in and answers the phone. There's no cleaning expense here. Oh, yeah, well, my dad does the cleaning. And what's this other line here on boxes? What are you doing selling wooden boxes? Oh, well, we salvage the skids and make them into boxes and sell them. And so I looked at it and said, this business is so well run as a tiny business. We buy it. We're going to lose all that because his dad's not going to work for free and mom are not going to work for free. And we're not going to be able to deal with the small scale sale of making these little boxes out of these pallets and whatnot. So I love going into a business that has problems and warts because we can then polish it and make a lot more money by solving whatever the problem is. And although I've done things around a lot of different businesses, it tends to be mostly a theme of technology. And I like businesses that are synergistic with what I do and where I can add other value to the company that I'm investing in. And I started when I was distributing products. So I would see a lot of new products. I would see a company, one of them I remember, US Robotics. They sold modems, and so we said, oh, that's a cool product. So invest in the product, but do distribution so I could distribute and put them on the map. And our market share in US Robotics was triple in Canada. At that time, I was only selling in Canada to what they had in the States because I applied my distribution muscle to that. So I'm a big believer in that synergistic investment because money is just money. It's fungible and available anywhere. And if you're just adding money, I didn't figure I could get the returns I want. So with that, let's get some questions. The first question I see in the chat box is, what were the top 3 lessons learned over the years in building companies and doing an M&A? So in building companies, the reason I was actually able to scale to 2 billion in sales is when I was doing 50 million, I would study people that were doing 100 million. When I'm doing 100 million, study people doing half billion. So I'm always looking at what's the next level. And what I learned is the next level in growth is usually not what more you do, it's what you give up. And so I would successively have to give up doing certain things in order to scale us and get us to the next level. The other lesson in building businesses, I'm a big believer in fail often, fail fast, fail cheap. And having a failure does not make you a failure. And I believe in introducing new products and failing and just doing it. It's better to do things fast and imperfect than slow and perfect. So that fail often, fail fast, fail cheap has been one of the philosophies I've used. And you only get credit for the winners. We picked, one of our companies chose to distribute was Apple. And if you're old, you might remember when Apple was going bankrupt. We did Apple when Apple was going bankrupt. And now everyone thinks I'm a genius because we did Apple. So Apple went through a massively long selection process. They had a beauty contest with all the distributors. The only smart thing I did is I showed up to do my presentation using an Apple computer. I was not an Apple guy at the time. And my competitor, the big distributors all showed up using a PC, because at that point, PC and PowerPoint was big. They showed up with 5 people in the room. I showed up with 1 person because my brother, who was very conservative, he was in business with me. He said, we don't want to do Apple. It's stupid. So he gave me a bar to jump over, which was this high. And so I had to jump over that bar. So they went through the negotiation, and Apple said they want 2 distributors. They selected 2 distributors. Then it went and got the legalization and further negotiation. And sure enough, 6 months later, when they did sign, the other distributor went bankrupt. So we were the sole distributor. And then Apple raced around to sign another distributor, but that took them another 6 months. But that gave us a head start in the market. So even after 15 years, we had a 66% market share on Apple, and our competitor had 33%. Anyway, that's a tributary. Lessons in M&A. One lesson I know when I'm buying a company is I look not as much at the general as the lieutenants. And the reason for that is lieutenants are used to working for a general, and they will be willing to work for me. The entrepreneurs tend to not be good employees. And often the entrepreneur says, oh yes, I want to work and whatnot. They get a payday and then they don't want to work. They don't need to work and whatnot. So I would spend more attention to the lieutenants. Another lesson on growing a business, the bigger a business is, the more the CEO's role is to coach on culture and let everyone else make decisions. So I am actually the opposite of a micromanager. I have a good team that makes all the decisions. I often say I don't do the work, any of the work. My people do all the work. So next question, what are the main things you look for when investing in startups? I have a screen. I look at 3 different areas. Sales and marketing. How tough is it going to be to sell? Can they sell? What's the cost of selling and whatnot? So I look at the sales and marketing. Second, look at the technology, to look at the technical. What is it they do, and can they technically deliver on the product? And the third is the business. Can you make money? Are you counting the money properly? Do you have the finance area covered? Those 3 areas, usually the people that approach me to invest, because I'm a tech guy, are technologists. They have the technology area covered, but they are missing the sales and marketing area, or they're missing the business area. So I've been approached with people, business plans. Oh, we're going to have 1 million users. And how much of those users are going to pay you? Oh, they're not going to pay us. Okay, well, that's great. You've got 1 million users. Now, given that, of course, I didn't invest in Twitter and I didn't invest in Pinterest. And I know those companies have been successful, but it's just the screen I use. And then overlaying all of that is the entrepreneur. And is the entrepreneur a good person? One other trick I do on investing is I only ever invest in syndicates. My logic is if I'm the only person that thinks this company is going to succeed, then I'm probably wrong. If they can't convince other people they're going to succeed, I must be missing something. So it's a way I kind of, and of course, the other people investing have to be investing on the same terms in the same round that I'm investing in. I don't accept that, you know, someone brings me forward a deal and they've got a better deal than I do, and therefore it's a good deal. Boy, this is weird talking to a screen instead of an audience, but where do I see big opportunities going forward? There is huge opportunities post-COVID. So there's an economy pre-COVID, there's a COVID economy, and there's a post-COVID economy. And there's going to be changes. There are changes. There have been changes happening. So every entrepreneur is in heaven because entrepreneurs love changes. What is a very tough thing to do is to get into a market that is steady state. So you don't want to go into a business where, you know, the sales are level or going up 2% per year. So what are those opportunities? Of course, it varies from business to business, but look at the post-pandemic economy, look at changes, and there is massive, massive opportunity. I tend to look at macro trends. Demographics are very poor in North America. Demographics are poor in China. Demographics are good in Mexico. Demographics are good in India. The economy in COVID switched from a goods and services economy or services economy to a goods economy because people couldn't go out to dinner. People couldn't go on vacation. They didn't spend their money as much on service. They couldn't get a massage. You can see me, couldn't get a haircut. And it will switch back to a services economy post-pandemic because I know I want to go on a holiday. I haven't been on a plane in a year. And I was on a plane every other week. However, I've also evaluated my life and said, you know, I don't have to be on a plane every week. This Zoom seems to work pretty well. I used to feel I had to visit my factory in Saraland at least twice a year, or I'm not doing my job. I have to go to these trade shows. I have to visit Home Depot head office and whatnot. But I think that I will travel half as much. That means in the hospitality industry, hotel, motel, I think utility travel may decline. Won't decline short term because people are going to go visit their sister and their brother in the short term. But I think it could decline in the medium term. What I mean by utility travel, when I would go to visit my factory in Tolleson, I would stay in a Marriott or a Holiday Inn or you know, it's a mid-level, and some people, of course, would stay in lower level econo lodge and stuff. I think that business will decline. Reason that's important for Danby is we have a 30% market share in bar fridges and hotels. And so it's really important that we track that. Same time, another trend post-COVID is work at home. I didn't believe in work at home. I wanted people to be in the office pre-COVID. And now we've worked at home. We are probably only coming half back to the office. So it's probably going to be 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, 2 days home, which means improve the home is here to stay. Home office is here to stay. That's good for Danby. I think entertain at home is also going to be good. That's good for Danby because entertain at home, we sell outdoor fridges and wine coolers and stuff. So next question. It sounds like you may have a lot of creative solutions to structure a deal. Could you tell another story about how you made it successful where a more traditional approach would not have worked? Yes, I love structuring the deal, and I structure it very non-traditionally. I will tell you that that's partly the way I will do if I need to do. So you look at, here's how much the company, let's say you're selling a company. I recently sold ShipperBee, a company that I started, to Torstar. So you look at what Torstar is willing to pay, and I said, could I also get a lot of advertising credits? So I got hundreds of thousands of dollars advertising credits thrown in to that acquisition because they are sitting there saying, oh, you mean you want us to put it in Torstar or put it in, on our webpage and whatnot? That doesn't cost them much at all. So their cost of giving me hundreds of thousands of dollars of credits. Now, how did I use those? I use those in Danby because Danby is a consumer brand. So you will see for the next year, a lot of Danby advertising in Torstar medias, and they own 80 community newspapers. They own tons of websites. They own, that was one creative structure. I often use stock options or warrants as another creative structure. So when selling to and I often will do that based on performance, because often there's a disconnect. Person says, "Oh, my business is worth $10 million. Why is it worth $10 million? Well, because sales are going to double over the next 5 years. Great, you're going to double over the next 5 years. Then we can pay you the 10 million. Here's stock options that are worth that, and they vest over time." How is it different today as compared to 10 or 15 years ago? Is M&A different? And how is growing a business different? I hate to sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but business seems faster now. And of course, everything is electronic. And traditional is out the window, in my opinion. You also have right now in today's economy, you have companies which 15 years ago, you would never have thought of selling a business to Shopify, for instance, which didn't exist then. So there's lots of different companies in that. What's the main similarities and differences between running Danby compared to a distributor compared to a technology-based company? Well, what I'm trying to do at Danby is apply the technology company management style to a smokestack industry. And mostly what that is has to do with speed and sense of urgency. At the same time, Danby did introduce a technology product, which was based on a trend. The trend we saw was people ordering everything on .com. So everyone's ordering on Amazon, getting delivered by Pearl later, and there was parcel theft happening. So I actually was sitting in a factory one day, and I said, "What else could we make in this factory?" And I'm thinking appliance, we're an appliance company, we're an appliance company. And then I thought, no, we're not an appliance company. We're a big box company. So we could make a big parcel mailbox. So we made a big parcel mailbox, but I'm a tech guy. So we said, oh, let's make it so it has an IP camera. Let's make it so it has an app to open it. Let's make it so it's, it sends you an email or a text when you get a parcel. Let's make it so we can remote open it. Let's make it so it has tamper alarm. So we made a smart parcel mailbox, one of the first in the market. But I'm not arrogant enough to think that we'll be the dominant player. We'll be one player in that. What I liked about that market, no one really was in the market of any size or heft. And so we would be the big player in that, unlike the refrigerator business where you've got Whirlpool and GE and Samsung and LG and everybody, all these huge multi-billion-dollar companies. One strategy I like is to be the biggest difference in size for my competitors as well. And the reason for that is if you come to me and say you want to buy 1,000 pink refrigerators, I want the order, I'll work for it. We'll make you 1,000 pink refrigerators. You go to LG, go to Whirlpool and say you want 1,000 pink refrigerators. Say, well, what do you mean 1,000? We don't do anything on 1,000. You can go talk to the intern. Don't talk to me. You don't get the 18. So small companies can benefit by going into the right size market. And the other advantage of you want 1,000, I have one competitor that we do about 400 million, I guess almost 500 million a year, but we have a competitor that does about 40 million. They can't do a $3 million opportunity. It's too big for them, $5 million, $10 million opportunity. We can do a $10 million. At the same time, Whirlpool can't do a $10 million opportunity because they do $10 billion. It's not big enough to move the needle. Your approach to paying for businesses is reflective of buying distressed assets. How do you approach purchasing assets of a going concern? Really, I don't buy it much different than anyone else. I mostly use discounted cash flow because for me, it's all about the earnings I can generate. And as the buyer, I try to keep the synergistic value. So if I'm buying a company that I think I can wrap under and I'll be able to sell double the sales because it goes into channels that I already have relationships for, I try to keep that value. At the same time, as far as structuring deals go, I do believe often in using bridging ways to bridge valuation. Because, whenever you're buying a business, they think it's worth 50 million and I think it's worth 40 million. We can bridge that $10 million difference through stock options, through success. I mean, I'm actually happy to pay the 50 million if the sales actually materialize. And that said, I I don't pay huge dollars in goodwill just because I'm inherently a frugal guy, and I tend to be in fairly low margin, high volume businesses. And so some people have outsized ideas of their valuation. So I tend not to be as much a buyer in those. I like to invest in those and be on the sell side on those. How do you view things differently after living in the US for 5 years? That is a really good question. Part of the reason I wanted to live in the US for 5 years was to end up with that. And we think that we understand the United States. We don't understand the United States. I thought I understood. I traveled to the United States so often that I had to track my days to make sure I didn't go over my days. Like because more than half our sales are in the U.S. And in my previous business, I got bought by a U.S. company, so I was in the U.S. all the time. And because we look the same, we speak the language. I feel comfortable driving around Chicago or Fremont or wherever I am. I thought that I understood American culture, but not till I lived in New York. One thing I loved, and this could be more of a New Yorker thing, I actually loved the rudeness. And what I mean by that is in Canada, you're trying to sell a business and you call someone and they are more than happy to talk to you, and let's take them out to dinner and let's do a board presentation and talk them out to dinner and then talk to them, and they never buy the company. In New York, it's like your 5 minutes are up, not interested. And at first you think that's rude. It's not rude, it's efficient. So that efficiency was good. The other thing that I love about the States, the scale is massive, 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 massive. So it's a way to open up an entrepreneur's vision of what they do. The problem if you're mostly in Canada is you're just thinking small terms. You think, oh, well, we'll do 10,000 of this appliance. Isn't that a good idea? As soon as you go to the States, so it's 100,000 pieces of the same thing. So I love the business size. I will say also the legal costs of doing business, the advisor costs in the US are much higher. Legal costs are much higher and a little bit more litigious. And I attribute some of that to contingency. I think also liability is higher, and I don't particularly love their healthcare system, even though I can afford it. All right, what else? When you acquire, do you centralize finance and admin for many companies under one roof? So I absolutely do centralize. And one of the first things I do when I buy a company, I always need to have an acquisition team that moves in for a few months and takes control. And the first thing to take control of is the spending in the bank account. I always do a 90-day plan. And the first 30 days is listen and learn, no expenses. So if someone says they need a new chair, no. The answer is no, because as soon as you buy a company, everyone says, oh, new sugar daddy at the table. All the stuff I couldn't get done with the previous owner, now I can do it. So it's 30 days, listen and learn. But I do centralize finance. Another good savings to be centralizing IT. I don't like having multiple disparate IT systems, but I will say that's a complicated and expensive process. And I often like buying a business that we can actually integrate into the company and not leave it as a separate brand, because maintaining a different brand, there is an expense to that. How do you view CEO and execs looking at stock price when running a business opposed to running the company the best way? Well, that's the problem with a public company. So I don't, I think when you run a public company, the ideal is if you never look at the stock price and you just run the company as if you're running it forever and don't look at the quarterlies, but it's very, very, very tough to do. I know as an investor, I often look to see, is this company have sizzle or is there stake there? So looking at the real, and I often find I hate to say it, current companies, some even current IPOs, a lot of sizzle, really good on the sizzle, little weak on the stake, and they have to backfill a good business. But in the end, good business tends to be good business, and look at the profitability. Okay, another message was, early in business, I wrote a book on time management. And the reason I did that was because I was challenged with time management. So I studied time management. I read all the books I could do and did all the seminars, and I got passionate about time management, developed my own system, and I did a PowerPoint to my company, and then someone else said, oh, can you do a PowerPoint to my company about it? Next thing you know, someone said you should write a book. So I wrote a book on time management. And one thing that stuck with me, and it was not my line originally, I don't know whose it was, people overestimate how much they can accomplish in a day and underestimate how much they can accomplish in a year or a decade. So I know that I am that way. I will have my list of things to do today, and it tends to be, 6 o'clock rolls around. I didn't get through it all. But when I look back, or a decade from now will be $1 billion in sales. And we will have accomplished that, but it's the short term versus long term. And I still firmly believe that. And I'm much more a believer in long term thinking. One other comment on negotiation. Time is one of the most critical factors, and who controls the time wins in a negotiation. So the ideal is if you can be in a situation where you don't need to do the deal and you can wait, because often the other side has to do the deal and can't wait. And if they're a public company, they need to do the deal before quarter end, and they need to do it to get the press and whatnot. So next question. Do you ever use gut feeling when investing in startup, or only formulaic? I always use gut feel. That's my first screen, is the gut feel. And the problem is, my overlying screen is, will the entrepreneur scale? And is the entrepreneur a good person? And is the entrepreneur going to treat people and investors fairly? See, the problem when entrepreneurs need the money now, they're very grateful for it. They want all the input that you have. Once they have the money, and a year later, 2 years later, they can often start thinking, well, I do all the work here. This guy doesn't do anything. He put money in 2 years ago. That was 2 years ago. And look at the size of us now. You're looking for people who are humble and grateful, but a lot of judging an entrepreneur is around gut feel. And I am a very intuitive person, and I have tried to hone my intuition over time. And I, even to the extent that I write down my intuition and then see what turns out. And and of course, what we all try to do is we have a gut feel, and then we try to justify with facts. But okay, have you experienced a professional mess up a deal? Well, I know there's a lot of professionals on the line, so nobody's going to like to hear this, but yes, professionals do mess up deals. Often they mess up deals when they try to renegotiate the deal that was done. And I know that's just being a good lawyer and start trying to do things. The other thing that sometimes professionals can do is bring up percentages of percentages of percentages. There's some possibility there will be a recall in this company, and if that happens, then the product burns a house down, then you could be liable for all this. And what's the percentage of the percentage of the percentage? So good lawyers, particularly, you present what the risk is, but is it an okay risk to take, or does it need to be really done? And in doing a deal, I've also learned it's not the paper, it's more the people. So when I bought Danby, I bought it from John Wood, who was one of my mentors for years and years and years, and a man I had huge respect for. And he said, how much do you want to sell the business for? He told me. I said, fine, I'll take it. We agreed on the phone, and it was done because I trusted him, and I knew that he was an honorable person. And in the event there was a problem, I would have called him and said, John, I messed up on this. You messed up on this, whatever. We messed up. And the reason he did it was the same reason. He knew that I wasn't going to pull a fast one. So sometimes a professional's job is simply to legalize what has been done. Sometimes a professional job is to help leverage and get things done. This was not an acquisition. This was a patent lawsuit. Unfortunately, I know way more about patents than I should, because I was on the BlackBerry board when BlackBerry got sued and lost they lost $600 million in settlement on a patent lawsuit at a time when they had $600 million. So they basically lost all of their cash in that deal. But I got sued by IBM in my previous business. And they sent me a banker's box full of the paper. It was like paper. It was like a huge amount of paper. And of course, it's really complicated. And I was a little guy at the time. It's me against the big giant. And so I said to them, okay, you're suing me on this patent. I'm going to sue you on a patent that I held. So I held a patent. And then they said, okay, so we need to do a non-disclosure agreement so that we can drill in and get more information and whatnot. And so I said to my lawyer, okay, I want a non-disclosure agreement that they can't sign. So sure enough, we put in a non-disclosure agreement, and then they blacklined it. And then we blacklined it back and blacklined it back and blacklined it back. And I think at some point the IBM lawyers just said to IBM, this guy's not worth suing. We're never going to get the paper done. And then they actually went away, and I never sued them on my patents, and they never sued me on their patents or whatever. Okay, in the 90-day M&A period, what are the other items? The initial 30 days is the initial 30 days is listen and learn. The second 30 days is developing the long-term plan, and the third month is implementation. So those are my 3 months that I do. But the first 30 days, because we do an expense freeze and everything, it's really healthy, because then people get used to, oh, this is not open season, this is not expense. And even during the 30-day plan phase, people aren't expecting you to make decisions, and it gives you a lot of power to do that. During that second 30 days, and even the first 30 days, we also do a real assessment on the people. And there's one assessment that we do, which is possibly unique, and that's a cultural assessment. So it's, are these people, you're really trying to judge, are they good people? If they're, and I don't mean skill-wise, I mean culture-wise. And so we will then right-size the business, usually in about 45 days after the acquisition. So I often will leave it running. Although one company I bought, their numbers were so bad. I remember they had 127 people, and I had let 100 people go the day we bought it, just because you couldn't support 127 people. And I apologize to every single one of them. I personally let each one of those people go. I told them I would help them get a job. I tried to help them get jobs. And we did an awesome job. I took one of my HR people, and we did, outplacement for them. And I would say that 99 of those people would still consider me to be a friend and speak well of me. Do you have new employees take psychological testing, and do you test key employees in acquired companies to avoid surprises? We do yes and yes on both of them. But again, I don't put complete stock in the tests, but yes, we do on both. With Biden's spending spree, do you see inflation coming back in a serious way? Absolutely. And people argue that it won't come back in a serious inflation. We are into not hyperinflation, close to hyperinflation. Now, in my industry particularly, I am already seeing 40% increases, 40% increase in cost. How do you get 40%? Well, I buy a lot of my parts and everything come from China. RMB is up 5, 6, 7%. Labor rate in China is up 5, 6, 7%. Shipping containers from offshore used to pay $3,000. We're at $10,000. Container shipping, that's just ocean freight, is triple. Inland freight is up 25%. Price of copper is up 60%. Price of aluminum is up 80%. Price of foam, which we use for the insulation, is doubled. So we actually have a 40% increase in our product costs, which we have passed on to our customers, and the end customers don't know that has happened. And the reason they don't know that's happened is, if I said to you, you want to buy a freezer? I say, great, I've got this freezer, it's $549. You go online and say, $549, yeah, that's in the price range, great, I'll take it, $549. You don't know that it was $439 a year ago, because you don't buy a freezer every year. So most people know what the price of groceries are. There will be inflation on those, and they'll feel that. They know the price of gasoline. To some extent, they know the price of utilities, but they don't know the price of their occasional purchase products. I mean, I have no idea. Does a pen like, how much does the pen cost? I don't know. I'll go on and see, what are the pens selling for? And that's what you pay, is whatever pens are selling for. And that goes over all of our products. I see a massive amount of inflation. Interestingly, this is a personal view. I don't see interest rates spiking to the extent that they normally would have in inflation. And the reason is governments have maxed their credit, and there's massive government borrowing. It goes against their self-interest, and it's political. So they make decisions for political reasons. It's actually genius to borrow money at this value of dollar and pay it back in micro dollars by allowing inflation to happen. So if I had borrowed $1 trillion, I would rather pay back in the $500 billion range and let inflation happen. So I think I'm really, really worried about inflation. And I think it's going to happen for sure. Any comments on Bitcoin? So I have been through a lot of crazes. I've been through .com. I've been through, we're in a little bit of a cannabis craze now too, as well, which and whatnot. So I actually think that those cryptocurrencies are likely to come back to ground. But partly the issue is people don't like fiat currency because of this inflation deal. And governments can just print more money, which can cause inflation, where cryptocurrencies it's a blockchain that is limited. And that's why people like those. What I don't like about cryptocurrencies, they're often used for nefarious purposes. One of the biggest threats in North America right now is ransomware, and you've read all about it and whatnot. And most of it is to try to keep the government eyes off of it. The government will take a little bit of time before they are able to track it. But just because I pay you in Bitcoin doesn't mean that you don't have to pay tax on it. But the governments can take a while before they can catch up on it. So I believe it's a bubble, is the way Bitcoin is. I believe cannabis is also a bubble, because I grew up in Woodstock on farming country, and I know cannabis is an agricultural product. Price goes up, people start growing it. It's not rocket science. It doesn't take long for people to flip from growing one thing to growing another thing. And there's also this big voodoo. It's sort of like ginseng. It cures everything. Yeah, it cures everything, just like ginseng cures everything. But it's only one thing. So look at that. I think I've got through the questions in the chat. Are there any other questions from anyone? Hearing none, probably back to you, Alma. Is that who I turn it back to, or back to you? Brian?
Yeah, I guess myself. Well, thank you first of all so much for it. It was very, very insightful. It's quite rare to have this many questions asked in one of our webinars. It's quite interesting. So I guess I'm gonna turn over the webinar to Laureen or Bram. Bram, are you there? He's kind of frozen right now.
Yeah. I'm here. Jim, this was
Thank you so much.
hugely insightful. Before I started the M&A Club, I was, I guess, in your terms, micro serial entrepreneur. And I can relate to a lot of what you're saying, and it's great to have your comments and your experiences, because it helps to focus what we do as entrepreneurs, whether we're advisors or not. And of course, a lot of this advice is helpful when we're advising companies. I mean, you're amazing. That's an understatement. And it's really a privilege to have you with us. Thank you for taking your time. I can't even imagine what's on your desk every day. And I'm not surprised that at 6 o'clock you haven't done it all, but it's really a huge credit to you. Coming out of Woodstock, you weren't Mr. Rothschild's son. You were, I guess, more or less some kind of regular guy who just got it very early on, and good for you. It's a great credit to you. I've started businesses from zero myself, nothing even close to your range, but as I say, I can relate, and it's fascinating to hear your opinions and views on things. So thank you very, very much. I'd like Alma. Thank you, Alma, for of course bringing Jim to us and to all our members. But I'd like to maybe have a, a repeat performance in a few months or 6 months from now and see what's happening with Jim at that time. And it's just a great credit to you. Thank you very much again for doing this and enlightening us on what a real entrepreneur is. And it's obviously great also to see a great Canadian success stories, of which we don't have so many, especially at your level. So it's nice to see. I want to comment on the US. I married a girl from New York City on a blind date in Montreal, but I will say that, and yes, we're very different. Our kids don't understand how we're still married after all these years. But I ran a major health club in Montreal, which was actually the biggest at the time in Canada. And it was owned by US people. And the guy who came up to supervise me every, I don't know, couple of months, clearly had been in the Marines, including, his brush cut, which was a giveaway, but he was what I call a killer. And I think the whole concept of a lot of these people who were in the armed forces is their whole mindset is very foreign to us. Most of us have not been in the armed forces. And I think that's a major contributor to the way they look at things. And it's to their credit, it's A or B, there's no A and a half, this was quite an experience for me. It was a $6.5 million turnover company, but they ran it like big corp. And me coming out of family and then small business, it was quite enlightening, to say the least, and challenging. But yes, it's totally different, the way they look at things. And as I said, just to repeat, I think the armed forces has had a major effect on the way these people wind up in business. And maybe that's part of their, US success. Anyway, thank you very much, Jim. If you have any further comments, otherwise, the hour is here, and we like to make things efficient. But thank you very much again. Thank you to all our chapter leaders. Thank you especially to Alma for having brought Jim to us.
Thanks. Have a great day.
All the best to everyone.